Okay, let's jump right into this. In today's explainer, we're taking a hard look at something that has frankly terrified sincere believers for literally 2,000 years. I mean, think about it. The idea that there is one sin, just one single action that God will absolutely never forgive. Not now, not in eternity, ever.
It creates this massive tension, right? Because on one hand, you've got this beautiful, overarching biblical promise that God's mercy is limitless, that Jesus' blood covers all sin, and anyone who calls out will be saved. But then, right there, coming from Jesus himself, there's an exception. One specific sin so severe, it's labeled eternal. So what exactly is this mystery sin? And, the question that keeps so many faithful people up at night, is there any chance you've already committed it? Well, let's find out.
All right, Section 1, Examining the Textual Evidence. To really get to the bottom of this, we can't just go off rumors or our own late-night anxieties. We have to look right at the source text in Matthew 12. Jesus says, "And so I tell you, every kind of sin and slander can be forgiven, but blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven." Now hold on. Before we panic about that second half, look closely at how he starts. He actually kicks things off by throwing the door of forgiveness incredibly wide open. Every kind of sin and slander can be forgiven.
The text makes a really staggering distinction here. And honestly, the shock value this would have had for a first-century audience is huge. Think about it. You can literally speak against the Son of Man, meaning against Jesus himself, and still be forgiven. That is pretty wild. But blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, that gets locked away in this unforgivable category. What this tells us right off the bat is that this unforgivable action is extremely specific. It's incredibly narrow. It's not just, any random bad thing someone might say or do.
Moving on to Section 2, the scene of the crime. Context changes everything.
If we want to solve this theological mystery, we have to rebuild the exact scenario that triggered Jesus to drop this heavy warning. He didn't just say this out of nowhere. Let's walk through the timeline together. Minute 1, Jesus does this incredible miracle, healing a guy who was blind, mute, and tormented by a demon, a pure, undeniable act of deliverance. Minute 2, the crowd is absolutely amazed, asking, could this be the Messiah? But then, minute 3, the religious leaders, the Pharisees, look at that exact same miracle and loudly claim it's the work of Beelzebul, the prince of demons. And boom, minute 4, Jesus issues his warning. The absolute crux of this is that these leaders watched the Holy Spirit do a miracle of pure goodness right to their faces, and they deliberately called it the work of the devil. They looked at the light, and they called it darkness.
So that gives us a really clear definition to work with. Blasphemy against the Holy Spirit isn't a slip of the tongue. It's not some swear word you yelled in traffic or a fleeting moment where you had doubts. No, it's a deliberate, knowing, and deeply hardened rejection of the clear work of God's Spirit. It means looking straight into the undeniable evidence of God and actively choosing to call it evil. We're talking about the settled posture of a completely, utterly hardened heart.
Which brings us to Section 3, Refusing the Cure, the Anatomy of the Sin.
So we naturally have to ask, why can't this one specific thing be forgiven? Is there really a sin so massive that God's grace just can't cover it? The answer is no. It's not that this sin is too big. It's that this sin, by its very nature, refuses the only thing that actually brings forgiveness. Think about the mechanics here. According to the theology of this text, the way anyone gets forgiven is by being drawn by the Holy Spirit. It's literally the Spirit's job to open our eyes and bring us to the door of grace. So, if someone completely rejects and reviles the Holy Spirit, they are slamming shut the only door that could possibly save them.
To make this a bit more concrete, think of it like a medical analogy. If forgiveness is the life-saving medicine you desperately need, the Holy Spirit is the doctor who brings it to your hospital bed. The unforgivable action here isn't having a disease that's just too strong for the cure. It's literally ripping up the prescription, kicking the doctor out of the room, and yelling that the medicine itself is poison. The cure is sitting right there on the table, but it's been utterly and finally refused.
All right, Section 4, the ultimate reassurance, the verdict.
Because so many people read this passage and are absolutely terrified they've somehow crossed that line, theologians love to point out this really fascinating paradox, and it's this. If you are worried that you've committed the unforgivable sin, well, that very worry is powerful evidence that you haven't. The general consensus is that a person who has truly committed this sin has a permanently hardened heart. They don't feel sorrow, they have zero tenderness of conscience, and they would absolutely never ever weep over the fear of losing God.
The text lays out this stark contrast. On one side, the hardened heart. It feels zero conviction, no sorrow, and basically just looks God in the face and sneers. But on the other side, the worried heart. It feels grief over its mistakes, it cares deeply about its spiritual state, and it longs to be restored. And theologically speaking, the very fact that you are concerned is absolute proof that the Spirit is still actively working inside you, still nudging, still drawing. And wherever the Spirit is working, guess what? That door of forgiveness is still wide open.
Let's actually rapid fire through a list of what the unforgivable sin is not, because this is where all the anxiety usually lives. It is not having doubts. It's not struggling with the repetitive sin or having a moment where you get super angry at God, or even going through a long season of walking away. It's not denying Jesus in a moment of panic, which remember, Peter famously did right before a rooster crowed, or acting out in ignorance and unbelief like Paul did when he was actively persecuting the early church. Both Peter and Paul committed massively severe offenses, and both were famously completely restored by God's grace in these texts.
The source material actually anchors this whole idea of overflowing grace in a rock-solid promise from John 6:37. Jesus says, "Whoever comes to me, I will never drive away." The theological consensus across the board is pretty clear on this. If any part of a person wants to come to Jesus, if they're reaching out even a little bit, that desire itself is evidence of grace at work. The door is not closed.
So, to wrap up our findings in this explainer, yes, the warning Jesus gave is very real within the text. But it's the final destination of a hardened, willful rejecter who just spends a lifetime saying no to God. It is absolutely not the fear of a heart that actually loves Him. When you understand this context, it completely transforms what feels like a terrifying passage into this genuinely fascinating exploration of human free will and spiritual receptivity. Which ultimately leaves us with this incredible paradox. According to these ancient texts, the sheer irony of the unforgivable sin is that the only people who have committed it are the ones who couldn't care less that they have. So the biggest evidence of someone's spiritual safety might literally just be their spiritual anxiety. Kind of makes you wonder, right? What other terrifying ancient warnings have we completely misunderstood? Thanks for diving into this with me today, and keep exploring.
Okay, let's jump right into this. In today's explainer, we're taking a hard look at something that has frankly terrified sincere believers for literally 2,000 years. I mean, think about it. The idea